here on the show and tell table, including two beautiful Lacanalias. So if you don't know what a Lacanalia is a large genus of bulbs from South Africa. They're heavily concentrated in the western part of the country where it's winter rainfall. And so actually these two are not typical of Lacanalias because they have tubular sunbird pollinated flowers. Most of them have much shorter flowers and are insect pollinated. But it's a wonderful genus and should be much better known and more widely grown in California than they are because we have the same climate. The winter rains, summer dry, that Lacanalias grow in and that they thrive in. And so these bulbs are dormant all summer long, nothing there. And then fall comes and all of a sudden they come bursting out. And the earliest ones flower in the fall, many of them during the wintertime, some as late as spring, but always in that half of the year during their growth cycle. And there's so many kinds and they're so fabulous that I don't know why everybody doesn't have a Lacanalia in their garden. But this one's Lacanalia aurea here with the yellow. Used to be considered a variety of Lacanalia aloides, but now it's its own species. And this one is Lacanalia quadricolor. Quadricolor, 4 colors. See those flowers? There you go. So it too is a close relative of Lacanalia aloides. So just two of the many, many Lacanalias that there are. There are also Lacanalias in flower at the Bancroft Garden, and hopefully there will still be some in flower when we meet there next month. Okay, aloes. So we've got a few aloes here. This one, Aloe castelloniae, and it's from Madagascar, and it grows like little, stacked leaves, and it grows downward. It grows on a limestone bluff in Madagascar, and the plants just, go down. And it used to be very rare, and it wasn't described that long ago, since 2000. But now it's becoming much more propagated and much more available, and Kelly Griffin's hybridizing with it and everything. Yep. They can be maybe 3 feet long, so they can hang down quite a ways. But it's just on one little cliff. It's really a very localized plant. And this one here is Aloe melanacantha. Aloe melanacantha means black thorn. And if you look at those leaves, they've got black thorns on them. Actually, when the thorns are new down there at the middle of the plant, they're white. And then they can turn kind of yellow or honey colored, and then they turn black. So all the older ones on the outside of the plant are black. And this is not an uncommon plant in Namaqualand in the northwest part of South Africa. So it's totally a winter rainfall aloe. And you can grow it outdoors here, although we get more rain than it would get in its own habitat. So really good drainage is important to get it to succeed. It flowers actually this time of the year. This one's probably not old enough to flower yet, but it has a red and white bicolored flower that comes up about that high out of the rosette. Okay, another one that is Aloe haworthioides, and it's got a little tiny orange flower. It's actually in flower now, and very bristly leaves with little white bristles all over the leaf. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful plant. The flowers really need to be seen up close because they're not as big and showy as most aloe flowers are, but quite wonderful anyway. And then here, this one looks like a hybrid, Aloe castellone blue, it says. So it looks to be a hybrid of castellone rather than a form of castellone, but it comes from Peter Beiersdorfer. So as I said, Kelly Griffin and others have been doing lots of hybrids with castellone because it has these wonderful little prickles on the leaf and curled back leaves and red teeth and stuff. It's a lot of nice details to it. And then we have a couple of plants here of Echeveria agavois. So jumping hemispheres. This is a Mexican plant and one of the hardiest of the Echeverias. Very easy for us to grow here in California. And there's a lot of cultivars of it. Ebony is one that has black tips on it. Red Edge is one that has bright red margins. But they're all easy to grow and terrific plants and able to take below freezing temperatures, which not all Echeverias can. Okay, now we've got epiphytic cacti here on the table. So here's a Schlumbergera and a Christmas cactus. These are commonly grown as hanging basket plants, as house plants. There are also a bunch of Ripsalis here. I don't know my Ripsalis. So if the person who brought these in wants to talk about them, I invite them to do so. Because Ripsalis is a very large genus, and they are epiphytic. They grow up in trees with the leaves hanging down or the stems hanging down. And there is actually one Ripsalis that jumped the pond and made it over to Africa, but largely they are New World tropic plants. So is anybody here who brought them in that wants to talk about their plant or tell us anything more about it? Okay, so we'll have you use the microphone so the people online can hear.
So I grow these outdoors in Orinda, where it's a little bit colder than in San Francisco, but they seem to be fine in oak trees where they're just hanging in hanging baskets year round, and they just like a very kind of orchid mix, bark, and a certain amount of perlite or pumice in the mix, and they're very happy. They flower with little tiny white flowers, and then they have little white berries on them afterwards. So yeah, I know the name of like two of them, and I've lost the names of all the other ones. So
there you go. Well, thank you for bringing those in. And then who brought in this little guy? Can you tell us about it? Yeah, so pinguiculas are a type of carnivorous plant, and that one has rather thick leaves, so it's verging on succulent, if not all the way there. But remember, succulent is just a descriptive term. It's not a scientific category. So if you think the leaves are thick enough to be called a succulent, hey, call it a succulent. Okay, well, thank you. And all these nice plants. Oh, I missed one. Oh, there's a little teeny tiny cactus. Who brought that in? Troy. Troy, will you tell us about it? Yeah.
It's Mammillaria breviplumosa. It's like a relatively recently described species. It's been in that pot for 6 months.
So that is what you would call a teeny tiny mammillaria. So small, I didn't even see it back there.
It's not really supposed to get any bigger from what I can tell.
Yeah, it's in flower too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a very nice little choice miniature plant.
Thank you.
Troy, what was the name of the species?
Mammillaria breviplumosa.
Breviplumosa.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Did was anyone here from the Bromeliad Society? Do you have a meeting this week that wanted to announce it? It was last week. We missed it. Bart's here. Where's Bart? This one. You already had your meeting yesterday, right? So any other societies that want to announce any meetings or anything? Go ahead. What? Knowledge is here.
We meet every Tuesday.
They meet every Tuesday at the Lake Merritt. With Troy on Saturday at the Gardens of Lake Merritt. Yeah, yeah. So, oh, the same Saturday you'll be there. $250 volunteers in the Gardens of Lake Merritt. That's a lot of people. That's like that's a street fair at the Gardens of Lake Merritt. Wow. And I mean, I feel like we could build a wall with, or like some kind of like, I don't know, we could build a whole castle. Yeah.
And Panayoti is also going to be speaking at the Regional Parks Botanic Garden on Saturday at 10:30. That's free at the Tilden Park Botanic Garden. And he's going to be speaking about connections between California and Colorado.
And the person speaking there was Bart, who's the director of that botanical garden. Is that right? Yeah, yeah. And the president of Calhort. And Panayotti's they put Panayotti to work when he comes to town. He's also speaking for a fundraiser that day too.
At the Ruth Bancroft Garden.
At the Ruth Bancroft Garden. What day is that at? What day is that? This Saturday at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. You can probably find that on their website.
Yes, and that talk at the Bancroft Garden will be on the super bloom in Namaqualand.
Wow.
So Namaqualand, where Agapanthus comes from, the northwest part of South Africa, it's one of those desert areas that on years of good rainfall explodes in flowers. And, you know, just like we had here a couple of years ago with the super bloom down in the Antelope Valley and so on in dry parts of California, well, South Africa is the best super bloom in the world. And Panayoti went there 3 years for outstanding bloom and just bathed in flowers practically. So he's going to show all these wonderful pictures so you can get to experience it for yourself. Oh, you were not able to get tickets? Okay, well, if you call tomorrow, I'll be at the Bancroft Garden tomorrow and I will help you go through the ticket process.
Brian Kimball's offering backstage passes to anybody who calls him. Okay, well, thanks, Brian. Get them while they're hot, I guess. I think I'm going to go ahead and Brian can announce them when we come back, but we'll do a real quick leg stretch. Any final food you want to get, and I'll get Panayoti mic'd up, and then we'll be ready to start in about 2 or 3 minutes once we get it all set up. So, Michael, you want to do the lights for me, and then I'll get Panayoti mic'd up, and we'll get started.
Okay, so we are very fortunate today to have Panayoti Kelaidis, all the way from Colorado to speak for us. He is a senior curator at the Denver Botanic Garden, and Panayoti has spent many years roaming the world, especially mountainous parts of the world, seeking out wonderful plants and bringing them back and bring them into cultivation. So amongst the succulents, especially the genus Delosperma, a kind of ice plant, he's brought back different species from the high mountains in South Africa. Everybody thought he was crazy, that there was no way that even the high mountain plants, they get snow in South Africa, but not like Denver, 40 below and stuff. And he said, well, you know, that we get insulated by snow in the wintertime, and these things might be able to make it. And he proved that that was the case. And so some of these wonderful Delospermas that we now have in cultivation are from his intrepid exploration, but he's been to many, many desert regions and mountain regions all around the world, seeking out wonderful plants. And today he's going to talk to us about the Drakensberg. The Drakensberg is the highest mountain range in South Africa. Actually, it's in Lesotho as well as South Africa. And that's where the spiral aloe comes from, where a lot of wonderful things come from. And he spent a lot of time trekking around up there in the mountains and has the pictures to prove it. Panayoti?
Thank you, Brian, and thank all of you. And I, in particular, I have to thank Kiamara Ludwig, who kind of helped me set up my little lecture tour. I am speaking 4 times, also in Sacramento, and I'm kind of a sucker for punishment. But it's also a reason. One of the reasons I did it is that if I have a couple of lectures, I can take administrative leave. So you see, I'm working right now, and I can save my vacation to take more trips and other trips. Because coming to California for me is not a novelty. I figured out one day that I've probably been to California 100 times because I have a lot of family here, both Northern and Southern California. And, you know, this is a really cool place. And I love coming here. And this year especially, I just was up in Eureka and came down the Highway 1 along the ocean, on a brilliant, clear day while my friends in Denver were enjoying sub-zero weather. That's sad. And at any rate, so I'm going to be talking mostly about the Drakensberg. Some of you are going to be disappointed because there's a lot of South Africa, and we'll look at that in a minute. A lot to see, but the Drakensberg has been my focus for much of my work. I've been lucky to go to South Africa 10 times. I have to admit, the last 3 times I've been to Western South Africa, which I'd neglected before. And it just so happens I've went the 3 biggest super bloom years they've had in this millennium. And they'd had an extremely dry couple of decades. My first year really seeing it the first time just blew my mind. So I went back and it was even bigger super bloom. And the one last August, just a few months ago, was the best of all. And I'll be talking about that elsewhere. But let's see if I can figure out how we move this forward. Aha, good. I wasn't going to use the pointer. I don't think I really have to, but basically most of the plants that you're interested in come from the very southwest corner, the fynbos, the region of South Africa that's basically the Mediterranean climate. It's yellow there, and you can see some of the mountainous regions. That's where probably a large percentage of the plants that you might grow from South Africa come from. Although the orange is the Karoo and also the other semi-arid sorts as you go up into Namaqualand and the Richter's Belt. Those are also extraordinarily rich in bulbs, succulents, perennials, trees. I mean, South Africa is incredibly rich. 1 out of every 10 plants on Earth grows in South Africa wild, and they're finding new ones all the time. It's one of the world's hotspots for biodiversity. About 60% of the plant species of Africa come from South Africa. So South Africa is incredibly diverse. And because you are naturally drawn to the most diverse part, where over 10,000 species are found in the Mediterranean and the fynbos areas, why bother to go elsewhere? Well, in about 1991 and 1992, there was a devastating cold spell in the Bay Area where it dropped down into the teens and stayed there for a long time. And collections were devastated, especially at the University of California at Berkeley's campus at their Botanic Garden in Strawberry Canyon. And they have a fabulous collection of African plants there, and a large percentage of them died. And Sean Hogan, who many of you may know, if you don't, you should. He's one of the greatest horticulturists in the world. He's now at Sisters Nursery. He was a staff member back then, and he was in charge of this area, and all of a sudden all of his plants went. And so he decided to go to South Africa to find plants from colder areas, and he went to the Drakensberg. Well, he's a good friend of mine. I knew about the Drakensberg because I'd already, as you'll see, I'll show you later on, I knew that there was good stuff there. And I was going to go on a trip with him, but it was canceled because they were anticipating that South Africa would burst into political flames, kind of like some of us. Well, anyway, so they canceled the trip. So I ended up going on my own. That was my first trip, and it was incredible in 1994. So the Drakensberg are that gray area around Lesotho, that's the southern Drakensberg. There's a northern Drakensberg, which I've never worked in because it's, first of all, it's much further north. It's not as high and not as cold. Although I'd like to go there sometime because I actually grow plants from there that are hardy. So now wish me luck. Let's see if I can move on. This is what it looks like. It's very lush green. It's summer rainfall, which of course you think, oh, well, we're from the winter rainfall area. This is no good. But, you know, plants are incredibly adaptable. I actually grow some fynbos plants in Denver outside because plants don't obey the books. They don't read books. And unfortunately, most of us don't either, which is a good thing because you end up doing things you shouldn't at work. And it just so happens that most of us have this little disease. It's called, we've confused water with love. You have to admit, oh, it needs a little water here. And of course, for some plants, that'll kill them. But a lot of these plants like that water. And if you do like to add a little water, these plants will be fine. The other nice thing about adding plants from this region is that they tend to bloom in the summer and autumn months. when the Mediterranean plants don't. There's a place for these. In fact, you probably already grow a lot of plants from Eastern South Africa and don't even think about it, realize, that you have. And we'll look at some of those in a bit. So it's a beautiful area. This is one of two ski areas. This is called Tiffendale. This is about 10,000 feet, and it gets enough snow that they actually ski. And this area is incredibly rich in flowers. And in fact, it's a wonderful place. I've stayed there on several occasions and botanized thereabouts. And there's very striking mountains of all kinds. This is the Sentinel Peak, which is the very northern end of the southern Natal of Drakensberg. It's at what's called the Mount Sources or Mount Source, which is the second highest peak in South Africa. It's one of the shoulders. And I actually found a new species of Morea there, which I'll be showing you a picture of. So this is at about 8,000 feet. This is what's called the Little Berg. Those mountains are sandstone. And as you get higher up, it becomes basalt. And here we are at about 8,000 feet, maybe 8,000 feet. That's about a 30-foot tree protea. That's Protea caphra, very widespread in all of eastern South Africa. So we think of proteas as being plants of the fynbos, but au contraire, there's quite a few that grow in the Drakensberg, including some very high alpine species. Oh, yes, and those are baboons. There's a lot of baboons in the Drakensberg. I can tell you stories, but we won't. This is not about animals, it's about plants. And then there's all sorts of other trees. This is a Cassonia, which I've seen growing outdoors here. You can grow many species of Cassonia. This one is one of the loveliest, paniculata. And here you can see it, the cabbage tree, so-called, and very common in usually the middle elevations, lower elevations of the Drakensberg. So these are not necessarily things that you would associate with high mountains, but these would be plants that are subjected to a lot of cold. In fact, it was about 1996 or 7, somewhere in there. They got about 2 to 3 feet of snow in the equivalent of July, all the way down to the subtropical Midlands. I had a friend who had a large Gasteria nursery in Nottingham Road, and his greenhouses were crushed by a 2 to 3 foot snow fall in the middle of summer. So this is a very strange sort of climate. And here's some more. Here's more proteas, Protea rupellii, a slightly different species than caphra, and probably the most cold hardy of all tree ferns, Cyathea dredgii, which is a spectacular tree fern. It can get maybe 10, 15 feet tall. It is unfortunately probably the slowest growing tree fern. Otherwise, it'd be one, but it would be one that would be absolutely hardy everywhere in the Bay Area, without a doubt. I'm not sure if anybody is growing this or not, but it's one of the most remarkable plants, quite abundant in the Drakensberg, as are many cycads, which I'm not going to show you those, unfortunately. There's just too much to show you. Here's a close-up of Protea caphra, and some very strange other plants. They have all sorts of plants you associate with Europe and the Alps. There's a kinds of all different kinds of mints of like stachys, and they have origanums. They have dianthus, many kinds of dianthus, very pretty ones that look just like what you would find in the Alps. But then one of their great groups of plants are helichrysum. I probably have photographed 50 or 60 species at least and grown many of them. This is a cushion helichrysum that grows in the high mountains there. The helichrysums are straw flowers in the daisy family. They're not succulent, but they're something anybody who loves plants would love. And more vistas and views, very lush, very green looking, because they often get, most of their rainfall tends to fall between the equivalent of our May and September, when you are the driest. That's when they get their rain. But Not always. They get, there are times when they have very dry spells in the summertime. The seasons are like they are in Denver, where we can have incredibly Mediterranean summers some years, and then we get almost maritime summers some years, which means that these plants are quite adaptable. And that's one of the reasons what makes them particularly good for gardens and for growing in pots. This is my favorite little protea. It's a miniature protea that only gets a few feet tall, and it actually it'll die back to the ground when they have fires and comes up like a perennial. It's called Protea dracomontana. It's quite widespread all over, and it comes in a yellow color as well. And it's one which I think is I've collected much seed of it, but we've never seemed to have gotten it properly established. Denver is probably not a good place for it to grow, but I think Seattle, Oregon, the Bay Area, I'll bet you could do quite well with it. And it's a nice miniature one. So proteas are the other thing I have to really stress is that the Drakensberg are the only mountain range that is a World Heritage Site. The entire mountain range is a World Heritage Site. It has a very rich flora. In fact, acre per acre, it's almost as rich as the fynbos. It's so diverse. There's about 7,000 or 8,000 species that are found in the greater Drakensberg, which is pretty respectable for that size of an area. That's about as many as California has. What's significant about the Drakensberg is that it also has literally tens of thousands of artworks of the San people. The San people were the people related to what we call the Bushmen or the Hottentots. There are many names for them. Some of them are not considered to be polite, but they were the original inhabitants of South Africa before the ones we call the Bantu, the dark, really black Africans moved in. Before the Dutch came, the people who actually lived in South Africa for tens of thousands of years were a cinnamon-colored, very delicate people who are not Negroid. They're a different race. Africa has far greater racial complexity, or not really racial, but human genetic complexity than the whole rest of the world. And South Africa was all these San people, and they did exquisite artwork, of which you can see just, like I said, there's literally tens of thousands of examples on these sheer cliffs all over the mountains there. So this is just in one locality. You can see they have, these are various kinds of antelope, which still occur there. There's people, and some of them are quite beautiful artwork. And of course, you see these all over South Africa, not just in the Drakensberg, but they're particularly common in the Drakensberg because the Drakensberg are very, was a very congenial place. There you can see an eland in the bottom in two different colors. But it's really fun finding these. Not far from these, I photographed aloe. This is one of about 15 aloes that occur in the Drakensberg. Some of them right up to the very summits of the mountains. Like this one grows very high up. It's called Aloe echelonus, and it's a deciduous species. It dies down to the ground because it gets so cold in the wintertime, it actually dies down, kind of like a Kniphofia would. And one of the many gladioli, the genus Gladiolus has a major concentration of speciation. Obviously in the fynbos, as many of you know, fantastic variety there, but the Drakensberg have dozens of species of Gladiolus as well. And I couldn't help showing that there's some plants that are universal. This is a spleenwort, maidenhair spleenwort, which is found everywhere. I've seen this all across Asia, very common in Europe, very common in the eastern United States, found in California, Colorado, New Zealand, Australia. So they're universal plants you'll find there with a little crassula. That is a little form of crassula setulosa there. We'll see that again in many forms. And these are just some of the herbaceous plants. It wouldn't be fair to tell you that Drakensberg is a huge flower garden. So there's things like Zaluzianskia are found there in very rich diversity. That's the plant on the left-hand side, growing with a little helichrysum. And on the right-hand side is one of the many heathers. There are about 30 species of heather that are found in the high Drakensberg, most of which are probably would be extremely hardy because they grow right up to the very summits. Not to my knowledge, not one of them has been widely cultivated in the northern hemisphere. This is Ceranthoides, which is a scarlet one that also occurs in the fynbos. That one is in cultivation, but mostly from fynbos representation. And of course, the genus Eucomus, which many of you have probably grown. If you haven't, you probably should. But Eucomus is concentrated in most of the species are found in the East Cape, and the largest number are found in the Drakensberg. This is one of the most abundant Eucomus autumnalis, which grows by the thousand in the summertime everywhere you go. And these are the two tiniest ones. On the left-hand side is Eucomus schiffii, and on the right-hand side is Eucomus nana. They're just a few inches tall, and they're, of course, they're bulbous. So they are succulents. They have root succulents, right? So we're getting into the real succulents now. And this is one of literally dozens of crassulas there. And interestingly enough, most of the crassulas in the Drakensberg are water lovers, and many of them grow in water. We actually have a native crassula that grows in North America that is a water plant. So it's very funny to think of crassulas growing in water, but that's actually a stream there that's growing in. And this crassula has turned out to be a very easily grown plant. It doesn't need all that water, but it can tolerate it, which means that you can't kill it if you're one of these people who has to water their plants all the time. That's actually the little tiny, it's like a sedum. It grows in among the gravel there. This is a white form of the same one, Crassula peploides. So it's kind of a cool little plant. And here is a crassula that is well established in cultivation. It's been grown for decades. This is in my home garden, Crassula setiolosa subspecies curta. It looks kind of like a sedum, but it's not. It's a high altitude crassula from the Drakensberg. And I think I first got this from a nursery here in the Bay Area from Ed Carmen years and years ago. It's been in cultivation on and off, although I think I may have lost it again, which is a pity because it's a wonderful little plant. And this is probably the biggest crassula of the Drakensberg, and this definitely has been sold by bonsai nurseries because it makes a wonderful bonsai. It's called Crassula sarcocalis, and it also comes in a pink form. And it's kind of like a more delicate jade plant. And you can see the relationship, very abundant anywhere it's rocky in the Drakensberg. And they can get up to 3 feet tall. They make quite large shrubs. And more bulbs and more crassulas. This is a monocarpic crassula that's very showy, called Crassula vaginata, and it comes in orange and scarlet as well. Unfortunately, it blooms and dies, but it has a beautiful rosette, and it's very striking when it blooms. Many unusual meadow plants, and then of course Watsonias. This is Watsonia lepida, but there are many high altitude Watsonias, which I've never managed to tame yet, but I have a hope that I can grow Watsonias. I know for you they're old hat, but I've been teased by many people. They say, Panayoti, it seems like your purpose in life is to recreate California gas stations in Colorado, because I've introduced hardy gazanias and hardy osteospermums and hardy ice plants, and I said, of course, we want to have Californians who move to Colorado feel comfortable and with all these exotic African plants. And so, this is Diasia. The genus Diasia is primarily concentrated in the Drakensberg, where there are all the perennial ones come from there pretty much, dozens of species. On the right-hand side is a typical wild one I photographed in the Sentinel. They don't look terribly impressive, but in the garden, they're fantastic. This is one I introduced from the East Cape called Diasia integrima. It's a cultivar called Coral Canyon, and it's certainly one of the best long-blooming perennials. For us, it'll bloom from late April to November, just all summer long. And it's a pretty good perennial. It'll last for a number of years. Has anybody grown Coral Canyon? I'm disappointed, and I hope that you'll make up for that someday. So go get some Coral Canyon. And David Salmon, who many of you knew, who had High Country Gardens, he thought that was my best introduction that I ever made. We'll be seeing this in various facets. This is near a ski area called Oxbow, which is in northern Lesotho. And this is a little tableland not far from Oxbow, maybe about a mile. And I have walked up there and on 3 or 4 enchanted occasions, and I've taken hundreds of pictures here. It's heavily overgrazed, but there's still a lot of plants there. Lesotho is heavily overgrazed. So this is, many of you know Tom Glavich, who has a fantastic home and garden in Altadena. He was on one of my trips. We were all very worried about him. His house escaped the horrible fires that came very near to him. He still doesn't have water or power. Or, he can, his house is really not livable, and he's had some damage due to the smoke and whatnot. But Tom is one of the great succulent growers of the world. And he was on my trip, and there he is on Oxbow at that basaltic cliff that we're going to take a closer look at, because that cliff has an incredible display of one of the most beautiful Kniphophias, which I introduced to cultivation about 25 years ago. This is Kniphofia or Kniphofia, or however you want to pronounce it. Not ritualis, oh, for heaven's sake. Caulescens. And I don't know if anybody's grown this particular Kniphofia yet. Of course, you can grow most Kniphophias pretty well, but this has been one that we have been really thrilled with its performance. It blooms for a very long time, from the middle of the summer to the late summer. And these are just some pictures of it on Oxbow with some interesting mesems growing in among them. We'll see those in a minute, but I just had to show you. These are the kinds of displays that you can get all over South Africa with different plants. And there we are. This my friend he's the director of the Compton Herbarium. He died in a bike accident, unfortunately. Chris Rue was one of my dearest friends there. And these are all just pictures of what Kniphophias can do. There are 40, 50 species of Kniphofia in the Drakensberg, and they come in every color imaginable. And they're unbelievable. I just have to give you a taste of this particular cliff, which is one of my favorite places on the planet. And here is that plant growing in a garden in Denver. So you can see we can do quite well with them in our gardens. This is one of my volunteers. And this is at Denver Botanic Gardens. This is the only Kniphofia that has hairy leaves. There's little fine hairs on them. Kniphofia hirsuta. Here it is growing in Bermuda grass. We have a hardy Bermuda grass that is not as bad as the one that you probably curse. It's much dwarfer and it's sterile, so we don't have it spreading. And it's one we've introduced, and it's become a very popular turf grass in Denver. And here's another plant of the same species growing in one of our dry gardens, Kniphofia hirsuta. It's a miniature. I'm sure some of you have grown this because it's well established in cultivation, but it was one of the ones which I believe I was the first person to bring into cultivation. Kniphofia hirsuta. Yeah, what's that? Can I help? Oh, that's called a California poppy. You might have seen those around here in the hills. And when I talk about the connection between Colorado and that's not what I'll be talking about, but do you know California poppies are perennial for us because we get the summer rainfall, and of course they can be here in California as well. But we're amazed over the years at how many California plants have really done extraordinarily well for us in Colorado. So that's one of the things I'll be talking about, not to mention the fact that many of the greatest California botanists started their career in Denver, which I'll be reminding you all of that many times. And at any rate, so, and this is one of our borders at the Botanic Gardens in our South African garden that was once. It's no longer in existence. We have it in a different spot now. And this is one of the countless orchids. There are, I think, 150 species of orchids. Most of them are endemic, found in the Drakensberg. And here's a closer look of it. There's a corysneum on the right-hand side, and I forgot the name of the one on the left-hand side. But there are orchids up the wazoo. They are everywhere. They're absolutely gorgeous, although the black one may not be so gorgeous. but there are some very showy ones. Here's a disperus and one of many, many dizes. Most of us think of dizes as being these big orange or scarlet things that grow on Table Mountain, but they come in all forms, including these weird little columnar ones. So when you go to the Drakensberg, you can go crazy if you go. Usually January, February, right now is the peak of the orchid season, and they're just amazing. And then more masses of Kniphofia and weird plants like Wormbia. This is a genus that's found in the fynbos as well, and it's found in the Karoo, but in the Drakensberg it's quite widespread in several species. I never figured out which one it was. One of these weird bulbs that you can find. And this is taken at Denver Botanic Gardens. This is a perfectly hardy Morea that looks like a yellow Siberian iris. Morea is extremely diverse, something like 100 species, most of them in the West Cape, and most of them are bulbous that bloom in early spring. The ones in the Drakensberg tend to bloom later, longer, and they tend to be easier to grow in the garden. This one's called Hatonii, but there are many, many spectacular hardy high altitude Moreas. And aloes. This is Aloe brumii growing at 7,500 feet in Lesotho. And here's a brumii variety Tarkaensis, which gets about 10 feet tall, growing on top of a mountain called Odeberg or Oberg near Grafreinet in the East Cape, in an area that experiences extreme cold. So there's a lot of really, I don't know if Tarkaensis, have you ever grown that at Ruth Bancroft, Brian? You've grown that? Yeah. And you've probably never had trouble with frost with that, I imagine, because that's one tough little customer. And of course, the most famous aloe of all, Aloe polyphylla, which the Bay Area has been one of the main repositories where I've seen this in quite a few private gardens here, and I've seen it in many other public gardens. This is, we went to the last stronghold. There are only 2 or 3 spots where there are lots of them. The villagers protect these here. What happens is South Africa is full. In the summertime, all these little kids are sent up with their sheep. And I don't know if you've ever read Lord of the Flies, but essentially that's what South Africa is in the summertime, is literally tens of thousands of little kids with sheep, bored as hell. And so their favorite thing is to steal sheep from other kids. And so they all have to have these huge mastiffs to protect their stuff. So hiking in South Africa is kind of thrilling in the Lesotho, because you never know when you'll be attacked by a big dog or by a bunch of little kids throwing rocks at you for having fun. But these little kids get so bored, and there's hardly any animals left in the high elevations because they've killed them all. There were dead shots with slingshots and even little guns and stuff. And these aloes once grew extremely widely, and there were thousands of them. But for a little kid, it's irresistible. You get a big rock and you throw it in the middle of one of these aloes, and it makes the most fascinating sound. It's kind of like, whoop. And they think that's why a lot of these disappeared. A lot of them have been dug. If you go through South Africa, you'll see a lot of rondavels have it. It's become quite a rare plant in nature, and it was actually a fellow down in Santa Cruz who reintroduced it into general horticulture. And it's a good thing he did, because it's a plant that's really been heavily impacted. But there's a few places where these villagers, for example, here, they let us come up and look at their aloes, polyphyllas. There are still some strongholds very high up. This is over 9,000 feet. There's absolutely no reason why this thing can't have a tremendous amount of cold tolerance. But I don't want to tell you how many I've killed, because it is not quite Denver hardy yet. But I have seen it in Berkeley Botanic Gardens. I'll bet you a lot of you are growing it. How many of you have Aloe polyphylla? Yeah. How many have killed it? But it looks to me like a lot of you still have it. And it's a mystery to me, because here's a high mountain plant from a summer rainfall region. It's breaking all the rules for it to grow as well as it does. But the really is the Bay Area, I think, that has been one of the main places where it's now in New Zealand, they grow it everywhere. I've seen it in England, they have it at Kew. It's no longer a rare plant, which it shouldn't be. This should be a plant that should become. And we now got seed from higher up legally. We work with Lesotho, and so Denver Botanic Gardens is now. Gophers? Oh, do they really? Yeah, no, not at the Botanic Gardens, fortunately. No, we don't. So a few other plants that you find high up there, I introduced a high altitude form of Anacampsaris rufescens that has been sub-zero hardy. And it came from the Witteberg, a spur of the Drakensberg. That's in my home garden where I had it blooming last summer. And when I first found this, I thought, oh my God, I found an alpine lithops. Well, it turns out it's not a lithops at all. It's Watsonia whitbergensis, which is Watsonia that looks like a lithops. It's a little bulb that only is found in one or two of the highest points of the Drakensberg. And we are growing that in Denver. But the plant that really has blown my mind over the decades has been seeing what I call the invasion. I should go back at that because I'm proud of that. I photographed this at over 9,000 feet on Ben Macdui, which is the second highest mountain in the East Cape, the Drakensberg, the very southern end of the Drakensberg. That was growing way the hell up there. And some of those were over a meter across. And unfortunately, I've never been there when they're in full bloom, but I'm told that they're just solid yellow. And I've seen these grow in quite a few gardens in the Bay Area, and I know they grow pretty well here. Is anybody growing truncata here or Euphorbia clavarioides? I'd get some because I was just up in Eureka, and Martin Grantham had bunches of them. He had them all over the place. And Eureka is, wetter than the Bay Area even. But I'm sure you would do very well with these. You can get them, coldhardycactus.com sells them. And there quite a few people have these now, so it's not rare. And it's an absolutely wonderful euphorbia. And very hardy. We are growing it in Denver. One fellow has had one for some time. Those are the seed pods, which are these little red, little ball-like things. And I once found, I couldn't find my picture of it, but I found a huge specimen, like a big basketball, bigger than a beach ball, and it just was covered with these red berries. And I thought, oh, tomorrow I'm gonna go collect those. I went back, not one was left. The baboons eat them. I thought euphorbias were supposed to be poisonous, but it turns out they're one of the favorite foods of the baboon. And the Greek word for euphorbia means good eating, which apparently it is for baboons. And here's one that's been going for many years in Rod Haney. Some of you may know he's the president of CSSA. He's had that outdoors in Denver for many years. And, but I couldn't resist sharing these two. These are two euphorbias, which on the left-hand side, that's Euphorbia multiceps, which you find all over Namaqualand, all over the Karoo. But always at low elevations. I don't know why you don't find it in cultivation very often, because I've seen just tons of it, and it produces a lot of seed. If you ever buy seed, it's like $1 a seed, but it is like a little Christmas tree. I photographed that near Komsberg in the high Karoo at over 6,000 feet in an area which drops to 0 Fahrenheit. And on the right-hand side, that is Euphorbia. That's pulvinata. And I photographed that Euphorbia pulvinata in the East Cape growing on a pass that was very high and cold. So there's a lot of really incredible succulents that come from really cold areas, which, by God, if you aren't going to grow them, I will. And but this is the one that started my career. And it was a fellow in near Seattle in the town of Kirkland had a nursery called the Plant Farm. And I was buying a lot of plants because my career was launched by being in charge of a large alpine garden. And so I was growing rock garden alpine plants. And he gave me 3 little pots of mesem that were called Mesembryanthemum species basutoland. And he said, here, grow these in Denver, try these. And I thought, this guy's nuts. Well, I planted them. And I think I planted them probably in the perfect spot because they grew like gangbusters. And they just got, the very first year, they made a wonderful mat. And then that autumn, when the first frost came, they turned a deep red. I thought, this is the most spectacular suicide I've ever seen a plant go through. But it was turgid red. And I thought, this is odd. And then the next spring, when it warmed up again, they turned bright green again. And I realized it was hardy. And then what the hell is Mesembryanthemum species basutoland? This was 1981 that this happened. Well, I had a very famous South African fellow come through named Bruce Beyer. And Bruce, as many of you know, he was the curator of the Desert Botanic Garden in Worcester, South Africa. Brilliant, brilliant plantsman. And he was driving across the country to go to a CSSA meeting, and we snagged him to speak in Denver. And of course, I couldn't wait. I grabbed him. I took him down to my little plant. I said, what is this? And he said, that's a Delosperma. And I said, a Delosperma. Wonderful. Now I know what it is. Well, it turns out there's hundreds and hundreds of Delospermas. It didn't solve my problem. It took another year. I had a man from the Smithsonian, who was one of the great botanists there, was a rock gardener who also had gotten this. And he sent specimens to the 4 leading experts on mesems. And they also they sent back 4 different names. But one of them was correct, and that was Nubigenum. And this is growing in a random garden in Denver, where you could probably see it in literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of homes. It's become one of the most important ground covers that we have. And this is kind of what it looks like for almost a month. And I know this does grow in the Bay Area. They can't grow it in Los Angeles. It's a little too hot, a little too dry, a little too mild. But I know that I have seen this in gardens in this area, maybe not everywhere, but some of you must be growing Nubigenum. I see hands. And does it bloom pretty well for you too? Yeah, just does fine. So here it is. So this is the plant that got me launched, and here it is in the wild at that spot called Oxbow that I told you so much, that had the Kniphophias just draping in the masses. One year I was there early enough that I got some flowers on it. See how it grows in among the Kniphofia, and it's only found at the very highest areas of the Drakensberg at about 10,000 feet. 9 to 10,000 feet is its range, and always on cliffs like that. And growing with it is the second plant that I've discovered after I thought, well, if there's one Delosperma, maybe there's more. And so I got one from a botanic garden in Germany, which turned out to be Delosperma cooperi. And it has a range that pretty much encompasses the whole Drakensberg area and around it in the foothills and out on the plains. And this is in my home garden. And here it is on Blue Mountain Pass at 8,638 feet. And it also, and here it is on Oxbow, growing on the rocks there in a little sunnier spot than the Nubigenum. And here is the form from Oxbow growing at Denver Botanic Gardens. Simply a wonderful plant. Now, Delosperma cooperi has literally become one of the most important, plants all over the world. I wish I had a penny for each one sold. We distributed it. Of course, it's a species. You can't patent or anything else as species, but I'm sure it has been grown all over the world now. It grows in Florida. It grows all over the United States. I'm sure it grows just fine here in the Bay Area. And it is sold by every nursery just about in garden centers and stuff. It is one of the most universal ground covers in the world. We introduced it in 1984, selling it at our plant sale. We grew a lot of it, distributed it. Couple of our local nurseries got it, and they distributed it. A year and a half later, the back of American Nurseryman had an ad by Heinz Nursery saying, "Our introduction." Somebody had given some to Heinz, and of course, it produces 1 million seeds, so you can go from literally one plant to 1 million in a year or two. So that was the plant that really launched me. Here it is in one of our one of the years when we were invaded by dinosaurs and growing on one of our hillsides at the Botanic Gardens. But there are about 20 lookalikes, things that look kind of like Cooperi all over the Drakensberg. So here's just a few. This one's called fixed Begeranthus. I think it's just a variation on it, but apparently there's genetic differences. This is Floribundum, is quite distinct. This one has a white center and it becomes almost sub-shrubby. This is growing actually in a nursery test area in Denver. Here's the same one in South Africa. They've gotten interested in Delosperma. They were never interested in Delosperma until we started growing them in the United States. Now the South Africans are interested, and I think they may have even gotten seed from us on this one. This is growing in a parking lot at a hotel. And here's a close-up of that particular one. Delosperma floribundum is really a very different and very delightful plant. And it's also become universally grown. Almost every seed company has their own strain. And this is in a vacant lot next to my house. I was a little nervous, but it didn't take over. In fact, it disappeared. I began thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be famous as the person who introduced an invasive ice plant, just like the ones in California, but didn't turn out to be so. But it looks just like it does in the wild. And here is the range of Floribundum, and that's the type specimen that it was named for. You can tell how frustrating it must be to be a botanist studying these things. And I'm one of those people. I was imagining one day that I might do a little monograph on them, but you look at these smush plants, and what the heck is that? And here's something that looks a little like Floribundum, but not quite. This is growing at Semongkong, but it's much more stringy and bizarre with a little flower. Not very showy. Not all Delospermas are fabulous, but I just had to show you. Here it is growing on a cliff. There's Aloe aristata on the same cliff. But here's a different one called obtusum, which is a little different, but you can see a lot of these magenta pink ice plants. Every time I go to the Drakensberg, I find a different one. There's so many of them. And there's many I haven't seen yet. And there's obtusum and growing in the wild, and that shows you the type specimen. Here's Delosperma herbaeum. This doesn't come from the Drakensberg. This actually comes from the North Drakensberg. And it turned out to be hardy, and it's in cultivation. Not terribly showy, but it's kind of fun. And that's that big orange area represents that North Drakensberg sort of zone. This is one called Delosperma caruicum that I introduced from the East Cape. And it's really an outstanding species. If you can get this, it is in cultivation. What makes this one so fantastic is that it's compact, it doesn't spread, it just makes a nice mound, and it blooms nonstop for about 5 or 6 months. It's actually a very heavy bloomer. It would be a good plant to be used for hybridization, I think. And here's the type specimen there. And there you can see it comes from the East Cape. There's the Karoo, the Drakensberg in between. So it's more of an East Cape endemic. And this is in my home garden where it makes quite a wonderful specimen for a very long season. This is a closely related one called Leucophia that comes from the Karoo proper. This is from Beaufort West. And this is at a nursery in Colorado. There are nurseries in Colorado that just crank these out by the tens of thousands. They're very popular garden plants in our area. And that is the distribution of one of the best ice plants that you'll see next, called Delosperma congestum. It looks like Nubigenum, but it's not a clump. It's not a spreader. It's not a mat former. It makes a little clump. And this one is very localized, just on a few high peaks here and there. Unfortunately, it just blooms once in the early spring. It tends to bloom for us in Colorado in March and April, maybe a little bit into May. But when it blooms, it's just spectacular. And those flowers are very, very big. This is cold hardy in Alaska And in Canada, places like Calgary, they can grow this. This is the most cold hardy of all ice plants because it tends to grow in wet meadows where it grows. This particular form, which we call gold nugget, I collected it. It was first found by Sean Hogan. He told me where he found it. I went to the same spot. I've been back. It's not there. It's so heavily trafficked with sheep that I think this form is no longer in existence. But there are other forms that are slightly different. There's the type specimen, and this is what it looks like. And guess what? A little white one appeared, a sport, which we call white nugget, and it's probably the best of the white. This is my home garden again, where it has these very tight little mats. This is probably one of the most widespread delospermas in the Drakensberg. It grows over a huge range of elevation, a lot of different habitats, and it's deciduous. It actually dies down in the wintertime, disappears entirely for us. Here, maybe not, but for us, it's totally deciduous. Here's the location. You can see it's found mostly in the fairly wide range of the Drakensberg. It's Ashtonii is the Latin name for it. That's a painting that was made of one of the early ones that was cultivated. And there's one called Peach Star that's been selected by Gelito Seed. And this is a pale pink one that I'm growing in my home garden. A very nice little tiny little gem for a rock garden. Delosperma coffleri, yet another species. Here's the type specimen. And there it is growing in our gardens where it makes quite a spectacle. And then, will the real Delosperma lewisii please stand up? Over the years, I've obtained this from different seed sources, Silvery Hill, from my own collections, from botanic gardens in Europe. I've gotten this, and every one I've get is not the same thing. This is from growing at Tiffindale, near Tiffindale. And this is another selection from Tiffindale that was selected by David Salmon. And this is, look what a spectacle it makes in the garden. Not Cooperi. It looks superficially like Cooperi, but the leaves are definitely distinct. This is growing in the ski area. And this is one from Lesotho that was collected, I think, near Sani Pass. That's different again. It's not quite the same. So we're desperately in need of a botanist to do some genetic work. Here's Lesotho pink at the Botanic Gardens. And here's one I photographed at Naude's neck that is technically supposed to be, it kind of keys out to lewisii, but very different from the other ones that I've shown you. Did you see there's in the background, there's a large Crassula acetulosa. And here at the Royal Botanic Gardens of Edinburgh, they have a totally different plant labeled lewisii, and that's one of the leading authorities. They're the botanists at Edinburgh are some of the leading authorities on South African plants. So is this the true lewisii? So here we have one plant, about 6 or 7 different taxa, I think. So they need to be clarified. So here's a close-up of the one from Edinburgh. Oops. I think I'm going in the wrong direction here. And then one of the cutest of all, this has had many different names. It was called Shawnii Hoganii, named after Sean by a Czech botanist. But I think the correct name is actually Alpinum. I think it was actually named before. But it's a little tiny, tiny plant that's only found at the very highest elevations of the Drakensberg. And it always grows on top of rocks, usually with that little Mesonia is nearby. So the two of them grow on top of rocks. That is actually the wild form that I photographed of that Delosperma. And here it is in a nursery in Germany that I visited. The largest hardy plant nursery, hardy succulent nursery in the world is in a town not too far from Munich, in Oettingen, in Germany. It's called, the nursery is called Winter Hardy Succulenten and Cactaean, a fantastic place. I spent 2 days there and I couldn't believe all the stuff he had. Look at all those damn Delospermas. He's selling them all over Europe. That's Alpinum, that little black one. And then finally, we found the true red Delosperma red, which we call Red Mountain. It's a selection of diari. And diari is restricted to the East Cape, only known from a few mountains near Tarkastad in the East Cape. And we were very fortunate to get seed of this from Steve Hammer. And here's one of the a more orangey form we were growing in a test bed. And here is variety Laxum, which is truly orange. This is one of the most beautiful of the hardy ice plants. And this was thought to be a variation on diari. And we obtained this about 25 years ago from Kirsten Bosch. It was a gift of the Kirsten Bosch Botanic Gardens. And the year we introduced this, we sold over 250,000 through our Plant Select program. And this has been a huge selling plant. We introduced it as fire spinner, as a cultivar, because it was a single clone and it is an obligate outcrosser. So if you cross this with anything else, you will never get this. So people think it's a hybrid. It's not. It's an undescribed species that is due to be named this winter. So this is a close-up of one of the most spectacular ice plants. And this is what inspired a huge number of people to leap into the fray, as you'll see. And and then I have to show you the tiniest little Delosperma, which some are now thinking of to put in a different genus called Sphalmanthoides. That was first sent to me by John Lavranos about 30 years ago. And it turned out I thought it was a Sphalmanthus. And then I had friends from John Traeger collected some from the Botanic Gardens, and it turned out to be a new species. So it was the first new species that has come through my hands. And this is being sold by a lot of nurseries around the world too. I don't know, is anybody growing this here in the Bay Area? I'll bet you can grow that, I'll bet. Troy, good work. Yeah. It's not been long-term for anyone yet, but just to show you, this is in a public garden in Denver. There's a park where they decided to carpet bed with it. And for 3 or 4 years, it was fantastic. Eventually they lost it, but it was cool while it lasted. Oh yeah, this is, as I had to show you one of the few from the Feinbos. There are a number of Delospermas that occur in your area, and this would be fine in the Bay Area if you haven't grown Ester Wyceenii. This would definitely be one I would try and grow because it's from high elevations in the Feinbos Mountains. Not hardy in Denver. I can tell you I've tried it. This is a garden in Germany. It's hideous, I know, but but it's interesting how crazy they've gone in Europe for Delospermas. I took this off the internet. One thing, and this shows you the varieties you can get. We were growing a mess of them together like this, and then one day, guess what? We got this, which is a hybrid, probably between Nubigenum and Cooperi. And it was our first hybrid, and that occurred at Denver Botanic Gardens, and it was named after me. I always told them, couldn't you have waited till we had one that was a little more manly, this little girly pink one? Oh, well, so that's my namesake, Kelaidis. It's sold as Mesa Verde, and it's a good plant, and it's been grown widely around the world, but a seedling came off of it from a nurseryman in Washington State in Spokane called Alan Tower, and we named it for him. And his form is actually better. So I hate to say it, my namesake has been superseded. So if you want to get, they're both in commerce, but look for Alan Tower. It's much more vigorous. I think I went the wrong direction, didn't I? Sorry. So let's zip along here because there's a few more. These are hybrids that have been introduced. This was a selection made by my friend Bill Adams. And these we had all sorts of hybrids appear when we had these big mesembryanths beds at the Botanic Gardens. And this is the kind of variation that we've ended up having in the genus Delosperma. You can see why it's becoming kind of a cult group for a lot of people, easily grown, big variety of color, and more colors are coming. And this man is partly to blame for it. When I first got to know him, I had a certain amount of resentment. A Japanese breeding African plants in Peru for a Dutch company for the American market. And then I thought, well, I'm a Greek American breeding, African plants, so I can't be too. And he's the nicest guy imaginable, but he has produced an unbelievable number of hybrids, and he keeps producing them, and they are amazing. Just one or two of them. He has the Wheels of Wonder. Not reliably hardy for us in Denver, but they will make it through, 2 winters out of 3. But they are spectacular to grow. This is my favorite, called Jewel of the Desert Garnet, and it's a little tougher than the others. But he's coming up with some incredible bicolors, tricolors, and very vigorous plants. And every couple of years, he has a whole new series, and they sell them in every box store in the Northern Hemisphere. He's made, I can't imagine how much money he makes. He's very good at marketing. This is the Facebook face for Delosperma and other cold hardy succulents. Well, you can't see it. It has almost 1,000 people, and a fairly large percentage of them are hybridizing these dang things all over the world, in Australia, all over Europe, and they're coming up with some pretty spectacular plants, like the one in the banner there was produced by a man in the Czech Republic. So these plants are getting to be pretty. This is a hybrid produced by one of the greatest of all American gardeners, named John Steierman. You'll see a picture of him. It's called Granita Raspberry, really beautiful color phase. And then this is David Salmon's masterpiece called Red Mountain Flame. And look at that. Just unbelievable. One with a very long season of bloom. Not many ice plants are this fantastic. So there are some really incredible ones. These are some of the ice plant beds in our South African garden at the Botanic Gardens now, our new garden for South Africans. And these are 5 taxa that are probably new to science, that come from my work. The little gold nugget may actually be a new taxon. The Smalmanthoides was first named, and then that is a Morea that I collected with Jim Archibald on Sentinel, that Goldblatt named Vigilans. And then, of course, Fire Spinner will be new to science. But there are so many other taxa we've done with. This is Chasmatophyllum. We've grown this for decades, perfectly hardy. Here's Russia Podarillii from the highest elevations in the Drakensberg. And this is what it does for us in Denver. Russia pulvinaris. And that's its range. You can see it's found around the Drakensberg, not in it properly, but an extremely vigorous and beautiful plant. More taxa, many Begeranthus have been perfectly hardy, Nananthus, all different kinds of stomatiums, rabias, cadias. We grow several species, Heraroa, several species have turned out to be very, very reliable. And that Titanopsis was blooming on January 1st when I photographed it in the middle of winter. And also here, Eloanopsis malherbii. And this is one that really surprised us. This is I'm sorry that the names didn't show up very well here, but this is Ebracteola wilmanii, and you can see it comes from a very sort of central area of the Karoo, kind of verging into the Highveld. And it's been a very, very good plant. That's in my home garden. Dinanthe tudicumii, very, very hardy. This comes from the high Rocheveld as well. And the ultimate one is Eloanopsis spatulata, which has a range of just about 20 miles around the town of, this goes around the town of Sutherland. And this is what it looks like in about October of the year there. Here's a close-up of it. And it was accidentally hybridized by David Salmon with Eloanopsis villedii that he collected in the Rocheveld as well. And it produced this, and then the F2s began producing more and more crazy color forms. And now there are literally hundreds of these that have been grown by various people. There's about 5 people hybridizing them, and they've turned out, many of them have turned out to have hybrid vigor and have been quite tough. And this is the man to blame for the best ones. His name is John Steierman. He lives in on Poppy Lane in Sandy, Utah. And he's one of the greatest gardeners I've ever known. These are just 2 little bits of his rock garden, which are just full of gems. The ice plants are just scattered all through there, just starting to bloom. I photographed this last April. I was there last April. You can see there's an austrocactus thriving in his garden from Patagonia there. And this is his garden in bloom. He gave me this, let me use this picture. You can see the Phalaenopsis hybrids are all over the place, mixed with penstemons and native dryland plants. This is a no-watered garden, by the way. So I've been very lucky to have done a lot of work in South Africa with the Sanbi, and these are some of my colleagues who have been very supportive of what we've done. But I think you've gotten a taste of at least mostly the Delospermas and some of the mesems that we've worked with. And to tell you the truth, after 10 trips to South Africa and almost 45 years of working with these, I think we've just barely skimmed the surface. I think there's so much more to be learned. So I'm very privileged to have been invited and shared this with you. And I want to thank my colleagues in South Africa who have been supporting me in my work there for so long. And I think I'm going to end with this. And perhaps I hope I haven't gone on too terribly long, in case there's a few questions out there. But at any rate, it's been a hell of a ride. What part of?
Okay, can everybody hear me? If you ask questions, Panayoti, could you repeat the question so the people on Zoom could hear them?
Oh, excellent. I just got a question. What pollinates the mesembryanthemums? And I think here in the United States, bees, I think mostly. I think a lot of things, they have lots of pollen, lots of honey in there. So I don't think they're very fussy, and they do set a lot of seed. And some people have said, you better watch out. You might have, some of these might turn out to be weeds, but they're not so big like your Carpobrotus. And I've never seen them really spread in any way, particularly. But occasionally you'll see some little seedlings. For us, it'll never be a problem because most of the seed is not as hardy as the plants. So when I grow them from seed, I actually sow the seed indoors and plant them outside, because I've discovered they produce tons of seed, but you hardly ever get seedlings in our gardens. But you might be a little different. So, great. Yes. The question is, what is the best substrate for growing Delosperma and these other things? In Denver, we can literally grow them almost in any soil. They'll grow on clay, they'll grow on sand. It depends on how much you water or don't. If you water a lot, it's a problem on clay. But we can water them because they come from a climate that's somewhat like ours. And there are actually gardens in Denver that I should have shown you a picture. There's a fellow named Ryan Harder who lives in a town called, well, you know very well, Castle Rock. He lives right near the Castle Rock, which is about 7,000 feet. They can grow Mecanopsis in Castle Rock. He has a garden that's just masses of Delospermas, and it looks like somebody butchered a bunch of multicolored cacti because they're of cattle, because there's just masses. He has pictures. If you're on Instagram, look up Ryan Harder. His garden is unbelievable. So that's up at 7,000 feet. They're growing them in Vail, has big spreads of them at 8,000 feet. So, and then in Denver, there's, like I said, I told somebody, maybe not this group, but I have a next door neighbor, and she has a spread of Nubigenum in her front yard. She has a bunch of rocky areas, and they've spread. It's about maybe 30, maybe 40 feet across and maybe 5 feet wide. And I had pictures, which I didn't show you, but I should have. They were great, of her yard, just dazzling. And one day I went down there and I thought I'd impress her. And I said, I introduced this plant to cultivation. I'll never forget. She looked at me and said, "Oh, yeah." You could tell she didn't believe it. So, how could you have introduced something that's, sold by all the nurseries and everything else? But yeah, it's actually, I'm afraid that they'll put Mr. Delosperma on my tombstone, but because it is probably my greatest claim to fame, because not everybody gets to introduce a bread and butter group of plants that has become its own little cult. People are way ahead of me now, you know, in Denver and elsewhere, and all these hybridizers doing things. So I'm thrilled, yes. The last 3 or 4 years, I just use an iPhone. Yeah, I used to have all sorts of fancy equipment, and the iPhone takes better pictures. And then besides which, I can put them on iNaturalist directly from the iPhone. It's much easier. And